She didn't just turn off the television. She reached behind it, yanked the cord from the wall, and let it snap against the hardwood floor like something dead. The screen went black mid-sentence right as the narrator was describing the final days of the Pacific Campaign in 1945. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, intentional, deliberate. "We don't watch trash in this house," my husband's daughter said. And what hurt the most wasn't the cable lying there like a cut vein. It was my husband standing behind her saying nothing. I had been sitting in my armchair, the cream-upholstered one Robert and I bought back in '98, watching a documentary about World War II. I've always liked history, not the loud, flashy kind, the slow, steady kind that explains how people survive when everything around them is falling apart. The late afternoon light came through the living room windows at that perfect October angle, golden, quiet, peaceful. The house felt still, calm. Then Vanessa walked in. Heavy footsteps, purposeful, the kind of walk that announces authority before a word is spoken. Vanessa Caldwell, 37 years old, self-proclaimed life coach. I've yet to see a single stable income stream attached to that word. She didn't ask what I was watching. Didn't greet me. Didn't say hello. She just stood there for a moment watching the television, as if it personally offended her. "Seriously," she muttered. I looked over the top of my reading glasses. "It's a documentary." She stepped forward. "It's depressing. Old men talking about old wars. We don't watch trash like this in this house." In this house. That phrase landed heavier than the insult. Before I could respond, she reached behind the television and ripped the cord from the outlet. It snapped loose with a sharp crack. The screen blinked black. Silence. My hand was still wrapped around the remote. I didn't move. 38 years as a licensed estate attorney taught me something valuable. Control your face. Control your voice. Never react before you understand the full picture. But this wasn't about legal matters. It was about territory. I turned my head slowly. "Excuse me." She tossed the cord onto the console table like she'd just taken out the trash. "We're trying to elevate the energy in this house. You sitting around watching war documentaries all day isn't exactly productive. I practice part-time legal consulting. I manage my own investments. I handle the property taxes, insurance, utilities, every bill that keeps that roof over our heads." But she said it like I was wasting space. I glanced past her. Robert stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, arms folded loosely, expression unreadable. "Robert," I asked gently. He avoided my eyes. "Vanessa just thinks we should maybe focus on more positive programming." "Positive programming?" I nodded once. "Vanessa," I said calmly, "this is my television." She smiled, not warmly. "It's our house." No, it wasn't. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I leaned forward slowly, picked up the severed cord, and ran my fingers along the plastic where it had cracked. It wasn't broken beyond repair, but the message was clear. She walked back toward the kitchen like she'd just rearranged furniture. "We'll talk about entertainment standards at dinner," she added over her shoulder. Entertainment standards. For 18 months, I had listened to small corrections like that. "Maybe you shouldn't drive on the highway at night. Maybe let me handle the mail. Maybe we should refinance while you still qualify." Small comments, small shifts, the kind you ignore because you don't want conflict. Because you don't want your husband stuck in the middle. Because after Robert's first wife passed, he carried enough grief to last a lifetime. When we married 2 years ago, Vanessa needed temporary space. Temporary turned into 18 months. 18 months of subtle takeovers. I sat there in the dark reflection of the blank television screen. The house suddenly felt different, not louder, just occupied. I stood up carefully, knees stiff, and walked upstairs to my bedroom, the only room that still felt untouched. Closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to replay everything. The mail Vanessa insisted on sorting. The way she'd started reorganizing my filing cabinet. The way she once asked too casually where I kept my deed paperwork. The way she called me Eleanor instead of Mrs. Whitmore. It wasn't disrespect. It was positioning. A woman doesn't rip a cord from a television over a documentary. She rips it to test whether you'll stand up. I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand. My first husband, Gerald, gone 4 years now. He used to say, "Ellie, you see the angles in things before anyone else does. Don't look away from them." Angles. I exhaled slowly. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa laughing in the kitchen. Robert's softer voice responding. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is loud. This was quieter than that. This felt like a deposition. At 8:30 that night, after dinner, where Vanessa explained to me what mindful media consumption should look like, I went to my office, closed the door, turned on my computer, and logged into my primary checking account. I hadn't looked closely in a few months. Why would I? I handled my finances carefully, but something inside me had shifted. The screen loaded, and the first unfamiliar transfer hit my eyes like cold water. Consulting fee, VC Ventures, $8,000. 2 months ago. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened. I scrolled. Another one. $6,000. $3,000. Automatic transfers, small enough to blend in, large enough to matter. VC Ventures. Vanessa Caldwell. The cord on the television wasn't about history. It was about control. And the moment she said, "in this house," I realized something. This wasn't her first move. It was just the first one loud enough for me to hear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe the way old houses do. Ducks ticking as they cooled, the refrigerator humming downstairs, a faint shift in the pipes when someone turned over in bed. Every sound felt magnified, measured. I've always trusted evidence more than emotion. Emotions can be manipulated. Evidence cannot. At 5:12 a.m., I gave up on pretending rest was possible and went back into my office. The hallway carpet felt rough under my bare feet. The house was still quiet. Vanessa and Robert wouldn't be up for another hour. I closed the office door softly and pulled up my account again. Consulting fee, VC Ventures. I clicked the transaction details. Authorized online. Recurring monthly. The first transfer had happened 8 months ago. 8. I scrolled through statements from that period. At first glance, everything looked normal. Utilities, insurance, property taxes, groceries. But now that I was looking with intent, the pattern was obvious. The transfers weren't random. They came 2 days after my pension deposit each month. Like clockwork. My pulse stayed steady. 38 years reviewing contracts and financial disclosures had trained my nervous system well. Panic is expensive. Calm is profitable. I downloaded the statements, all of them. Then I opened my credit report. I hadn't checked it in almost a year. No reason to. My mortgage was paid off in 2009. No outstanding loans. The report loaded. There it was. Home equity line of credit opened 4 months ago. $35,000 limit. Balance drawn $18,400. My chair creaked as I leaned back slowly. I hadn't opened a line of credit. I never would without a very specific reason. The application date caught my attention. For days after Vanessa had helped me reorganize my filing cabinet. I remembered that afternoon clearly. She'd insisted I was overcomplicating my paperwork. Said I should scan everything to the cloud. Said modern systems were more efficient. I remembered her holding my social security card. I remembered her asking about my signature style. Said she admired how classic it looked. Classic. I opened the Helic documentation. Electronic signature. My name. Not quite right. Close enough that most people wouldn't notice, but I had signed my name the same way since 1981. This one had a slight leftward lean at the finish. I never lean left at the finish. The house felt smaller. Not physically, psychologically. For 18 months, I had tolerated small things. Vanessa changing the Wi-Fi password for security reasons. Vanessa suggesting she handle the quarterly tax filings. Vanessa recommending I simplify my investment portfolio. She framed everything as help. And I let her because I loved my husband. Because after losing Gerald, loneliness had scared me more than pride. Because when Robert came into my life, warm and grieving and hopeful, I told myself that compromise was part of love. But compromise isn't surrender. And this wasn't help. This was positioning. At 6:02 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Vanessa, heavy, confident, ownership in every step. I minimized the browser and shut my laptop quietly. The doorbell rang at 6:45. Package delivery. Vanessa called up the stairs. Eleanor, I'll get it. Eleanor. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not ma'am. Just Eleanor. I waited until I heard the front door close. Then I reopened the laptop and printed everything. Every transfer, every signature, every line of the Helic agreement. Then I checked something else. My email. I rarely use the shared household desktop downstairs anymore. Vanessa had insisted it was easier for everyone if certain accounts stayed logged in there for convenience. Convenience. I logged into the old tablet Gerald had bought me years ago. It still synced occasionally. There were emails I hadn't noticed. Subject line, long-term care planning, preliminary discussion. My stomach didn't drop this time. It solidified. The email thread was between Vanessa and someone named Thomas Bauer, Senior Placement Advisor, Meadowbrook Assisted Living. Vanessa's message, looking into options for a family member who's beginning to show mild cognitive decline. We want to transition her smoothly before things get worse. A family member. Cognitive decline. Transition her. I scrolled further. Thomas replied professionally. We would need documented evaluation from a physician, plus proof of financial readiness and power of attorney authorization. Power of attorney. Attached was a PDF draft. My name, Eleanor Whitmore. Agent, Vanessa Caldwell. My breath slowed deliberately. She wasn't just siphoning money. She was building a case. I kept reading. Vanessa, my father agrees it may be time to consider professional care. She's been forgetful lately. My father agrees. Robert was copied on the thread. He hadn't replied. But he hadn't objected either. The room felt colder. Not dramatically, just subtly, like someone had cracked a window in winter. I closed the email and sat back. It wasn't about the television. It was never about the television. It was about establishing a narrative. Old woman watches depressing programs. Old woman isn't productive. Old woman forgets things. Old woman shouldn't manage finances. Old woman should transition. And once transitioned, house valued at $720,000. Helic in place. Liquid assets accessible. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the printed papers. For the first time in 18 months, I didn't feel confused. I felt clear. When you practice estate law, you don't accuse first. You gather. You verify. You protect assets. At 7:30 a.m., Vanessa knocked on my office door. Hey, Eleanor, you okay? You seemed a little distant last night. I looked up at her. She leaned casually against the frame like she owned it. I'm fine, I said evenly. Good. We just want what's best for you. Of course you do. I smiled slightly. I appreciate that. She nodded and walked away. At 8:10, Robert left for his morning walk. At 8:20, Vanessa followed for her gym run. By 8:22, I had my phone in my hand, and I called the one person who had known me longer than either of them. Patricia Osei, my colleague and personal attorney. When she answered, her voice was warm and immediate. Ellie, what's going on? I need to review some documents, I said calmly. And I need to do it today. There was a pause. Then her tone sharpened. Tell me everything. I glanced at the stack of printed evidence on my desk. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a wife trying to keep peace. I felt like a litigator building a case. I believe, I said quietly, someone in my house has been moving assets. And this time, I wasn't going to look away from the angles. Patricia Osei has been my colleague and trusted legal advisor for nearly 22 years. We met when she was a junior associate reviewing probate filings for a mutual client. I remember telling her back then that the best attorneys, like the most careful planners, weren't dramatic. They were methodical. By 9:30 a.m., I was sitting across from her in her office downtown, a neat stack of printed statements resting between us. She didn't interrupt while I explained. She didn't react emotionally. She just adjusted her glasses and read, line by line, transaction by transaction. When she finished, she placed both palms flat on the desk. This isn't careless, she said quietly. No, it's deliberate. Yes, She slid the Helic agreement closer. The signature is close enough that most institutions wouldn't flag it without a formal challenge. I never authorized it. I believe you. She leaned back in her chair. And this email thread, the long-term care planning. This is more concerning than the money. I nodded. She's building a capacity argument. Patricia's jaw tightened. If someone convinces a physician you're declining and there's a drafted power of attorney already prepared, things can move fast. I'm not declining. I know that, she said, but perception can be engineered. Engineered. That word fit. For 18 months, Vanessa had been engineering perception. The TV incident wasn't impulsive. It was narrative reinforcement. Old woman watches depressing content. Old woman reacts emotionally. Old woman shouldn't manage assets. Patricia tapped the page. First, we freeze everything immediately. I'll draft a fraud alert and notify the bank's legal department. Second, you revoke any existing authorizations in writing. I never granted one. That doesn't matter. We'll formalize your refusal. She folded her hands. Third, you document everything. Dates, conversations, behavioral changes. I've already started. She gave me a small nod of approval. I also recommend a voluntary cognitive evaluation, she added carefully. I met her eyes. To preempt any claim, she clarified. You control the narrative. It stung. Not because I doubted my mind, but because someone in my own house had made that suggestion necessary. By noon, we had filed fraud alerts with both the bank and credit agencies. The Helic was frozen pending investigation. The recurring transfers were halted. But something still bothered me. This doesn't explain where all the money went, I said. Patricia looked at me thoughtfully. Do you want to know? Yes. Then we subpoena the receiving accounts. I nodded slowly. That would escalate things. There's a moment in every case where you decide whether you're correcting a procedural error or uncovering criminal intent. This wasn't procedural. By 2:15 p.m., I was back home. The house felt strangely peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. The coffee maker still smelled faintly from the morning brew. The television remained dark, the cord still lying loosely behind the stand. I didn't plug it back in. Not yet. Instead, I went upstairs to the guest room Vanessa used as her office. I didn't search aggressively. I observed. Desk surface clean, laptop gone. She carried it daily. But on the bookshelf were 3 folders labeled Expansion Strategy, Liquidity Plan, Asset Transition. My hand paused over the last one. Asset Transition. Inside were printed property assessments of my home, recent ones, market comparison sheets, projected sale values. There was even a spreadsheet estimating post-care surplus after liquidation. Liquidation. The word didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt personal. At the bottom of one page in Vanessa's handwriting were 2 words, after evaluation. I closed the folder slowly. The room felt airless. This wasn't just about siphoning funds. It was about displacement. Remove Eleanor. Control assets. Liquidate property. I walked back downstairs carefully, the folders in my hand. I placed them on the dining table and sat. For the first time since Gerald passed, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Naive. I had believed compromise equaled harmony. I had believed patience equaled peace. But patience without boundaries invites strategy. At 5:47 p.m., Robert's car pulled into the driveway. His steps inside were lighter than Vanessa's. He entered the dining room and saw the folders immediately. His face changed. Eleanor, he said carefully. What's this? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply turned one folder toward him. Asset Transition, I read aloud. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped pages. I didn't. You were copied on the emails. He swallowed. I thought she was just researching options. For me. Tears welled in his eyes. She said you'd been forgetful. She said refinancing would help stabilize things. I have no mortgage. I know. He sat down slowly. She said it was temporary, that you'd be safer somewhere with supervision. Supervision. I leaned back in my chair. Robert, I said gently, did you believe I was declining? He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt something fracture. I wasn't sure, he whispered. It wasn't betrayal in the dramatic sense. It was doubt. And doubt is enough. The front door opened at 6:02. Vanessa's footsteps entered. She stopped when she saw us at the table. What's going on? I met her eyes calmly. Sit down. She didn't. Instead, her gaze fell to the folders. Recognition flashed. Then calculation. What are those doing out? I folded my hands neatly. I'm reviewing the record, I said. She let out a short laugh. Reviewing what? My life. Silence. Robert looked between us. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. Am I? I slid the Helic agreement across the table. She didn't touch it. The room felt tight now, measured, like the seconds before a verdict. You opened a line of credit in my name, I said quietly. She didn't deny it immediately. Instead, she smiled slightly. You would have benefited from it. That was the moment. The mask slipped. Not anger, not apology, just entitlement. And I realized something with perfect clarity. She didn't think she was stealing. She thought she was reallocating. And the assisted living evaluation? I asked evenly. She crossed her arms. We're thinking long-term. No, you're thinking ownership. Robert's voice broke. Vanessa. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. You can't manage everything forever. I held her gaze. Watch me. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her expression. Not fear, but recalibration. And I knew then. The television cord had been a test. This was the real game. And she had just realized I wasn't confused. I was calculating. Vanessa didn't explode. That would have been easier. Explosions are obvious. They're loud. You can point to them and say, there, that's the problem. Instead, she went quiet. Not the confused kind of quiet, not the embarrassed kind, the assessing kind. She looked at the documents on the table, then at me, then at her father. Her posture shifted subtly, shoulders squared, chin lifted. You're misunderstanding everything, she said finally. I don't think I am, I replied calmly. You've always been cautious with money, she continued, as if explaining a complicated concept to a child. I was just helping optimize it. That Helic was strategic. Rates are favorable right now. In my name, I said. You benefit from it without my authorization. She exhaled slowly. We talked about leveraging equity. We did not talk about forging my signature. That landed. Robert flinched at the word forging. Vanessa's jaw tightened. That's dramatic. No, I said quietly. It's precise. She looked at her father again, searching for alignment. He didn't give it. His eyes stayed on the table. That was the first shift. Small, but significant. I have a call in the morning, Vanessa said finally. We'll revisit this when you've calmed down. She turned and walked upstairs. Calm down. I almost smiled. The most dangerous assumption a person can make is mistaking silence for weakness. I gathered the folders carefully and carried them into my office. Locked the door, sat down, then made 3 calls. The first was to the bank's fraud department, confirming the freeze on the Helic. They informed me the investigation would likely escalate to their internal legal unit. Good. The second was to a locksmith. I need all exterior locks replaced tomorrow, I said. Front, back, garage, side entry. There was a pause on the other end. Security issue. Yes. We can do 9 a.m. That works. The third call was harder. Robert, I said gently from my office doorway. I need you to stay home tomorrow. His eyes looked hollow. Why? Because things are about to become very clear. He nodded slowly. That night, the house was quiet in a different way. Vanessa stayed upstairs. I didn't hear her television. Didn't hear her usual pacing. I slept better than I had the night before. Not peacefully, but decisively. At 8:55 a.m., the locksmith arrived. Vanessa was still in her room. Robert sat at the kitchen table, pale but composed. When the drilling began at the front door, Vanessa came downstairs. What the hell is that? New locks, I said evenly. For what? For security. She looked at her father. Did you know about this? He hesitated. Yes. That was the second shift. She turned back to me. You can't just change locks. I can, I said calmly. It's my house. The words settled between us. Not angry, not shouted. Stated. Vanessa laughed once. You're spiraling. No, I said. I'm protecting assets. The locksmith moved methodically, removed deadbolts, installed reinforced plates, rekeyed every entry. I watched carefully. Vanessa paced. At 10:12 a.m., the final lock clicked into place. I signed the invoice and placed all spare keys in my pocket. Vanessa stood near the entryway, arms crossed. So, what's the plan? She asked coldly. The plan, I said, is accountability. She stared at me. For 18 months, funds were transferred without authorization. A line of credit was opened under my name. Assisted living discussions were initiated without my consent. That was proactive planning. That was exploitation. Her face hardened. You think I'm stealing from you? I didn't raise my voice. I think you've confused entitlement with permission. Silence. The bank called at 11:30. They had traced the Helic withdrawals to an account registered under VC Ventures, Vanessa's business entity. Funds had been transferred into a personal brokerage account. Speculative trades, high-risk options, losses, significant ones. I thanked the representative and hung up. Then I walked into the living room. Vanessa and Robert both looked up. The bank confirmed the funds were diverted into your trading account, I said calmly. Robert's breath caught. Vanessa's composure cracked for half a second. It was temporary leverage. You lost $17,000, I said. That's market fluctuation. That's fraud. She stepped forward, anger surfacing now. You wouldn't even notice the money if I hadn't pushed growth. I noticed, I replied evenly. Eventually. She scoffed. You're acting like some victim. No, I said. I'm acting like the owner. That word changed the temperature in the room. Owner. Robert's eyes widened slightly. Vanessa's lips pressed thin. You're overreacting, she repeated. No, I said quietly. I'm responding. At noon, Patricia emailed formal notice of fraud and intent to pursue restitution. I forwarded a copy to Vanessa. She read it on her phone. Her expression shifted from irritation to calculation to something sharper. You're involving lawyers, she asked. I already did. Robert looked between us, shaken. Eleanor, maybe we can handle this privately. We tried private, I said gently. Private is how we got here. Vanessa stepped closer to me now. Do you have any idea what this will do to Dad? Yes, I said. That's why I'm doing it now, not later. She laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero? I think I'm done being passive. For a long moment, no one moved. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room again, the same angle as yesterday when she ripped the television cord from the wall. I walked over to the console, picked up the cable, plugged it back in. The screen lit up. History Channel, volume low, steady. Vanessa stared at the television like it was an insult. It's not about the show, I said calmly. She met my eyes. I know. That's when I saw it. The realization. The shift in power. For 18 months, she had slowly repositioned herself. Controlled the narrative, controlled perception, controlled small systems. But control depends on silence, and I was no longer silent. At 6:08 p.m., Vanessa tried her key in the garage door. It didn't work. She stared at it, then at me, and something in her expression hardened beyond irritation. This isn't over, she said quietly. No, I agreed. It's just begun. At 6:12 p.m., I heard her car engine again. Not leaving, returning. The driveway gravel shifted under her tires with a sharp, deliberate crunch. I was still in the living room, seated in my armchair, the television now calmly humming at low volume. Robert stood in the kitchen doorway, hands trembling around a dish towel he wasn't using. Vanessa had left 20 minutes earlier without another word after discovering her key no longer worked. I assumed she was cooling off. I was wrong. The front door handle jerked hard. Once, twice, then sharp pounding. Open the door. Her voice carried through the wood like something stripped of its careful polish. I didn't rush. I muted the television, stood up slowly, walked to the door, and engaged the security chain before opening it 6 inches. Vanessa's face was flushed, anger replacing calculation. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Protecting my property, I replied evenly. You locked me out. I changed the locks. You can't just exile me. This isn't exile, I said calmly. It's consequence. Robert hovered behind me in the hallway. Vanessa, he said shakily. Please calm down. She ignored him. You think this makes you powerful? She spat. You're paranoid. You're unstable. I held her gaze. If I were unstable, I wouldn't have documentation. I slid the folder through the narrow opening. Bank reports, fraud alert confirmations, the forensic summary from the Hellick Review. She didn't take it. I don't need to read your paperwork. That's unfortunate, I said, because law enforcement already has. That wasn't entirely true yet, but the bank had flagged the account for investigation. And sometimes truth moves faster when fear precedes it. Her breathing shifted. Less theatrical, more dangerous. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. I already regret trusting you, I answered. The air between us thickened. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on down the street as evening settled. Suburbia has a way of pretending nothing unusual is happening, even when voices rise. You have 10 minutes, I said calmly. I'll allow you to collect personal items from the garage. I'll bring them to the driveway. You're evicting me. I'm revoking access. She laughed once, sharp and hollow. You think Dad's choosing you? That landed, but I didn't flinch. This isn't about choice, I said. It's about legality. She stepped forward suddenly, pushing against the door. The chain held. Robert gasped. Don't, I warned evenly. Her eyes burned. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. She stepped back finally. For a moment, I thought she might lunge again. Instead, she turned and kicked the porch railing hard enough to rattle it. Then she stormed toward her car. I closed the door gently. Not slammed. Gently. Robert's voice trembled. Eleanor, what's going to happen? I turned to him. That depends on whether she stops. He sank into the kitchen chair. I didn't know it was this bad. I know. His eyes filled. I thought she was helping. I know, and I meant it. Because manipulation rarely looks malicious at first. It looks attentive, protective, involved. At 7:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. You have no idea what you just started. I didn't respond. At 8:41 p.m., headlights flashed across the living room walls again. She was back. This time, there was no attempt at keys, just immediate violence. The mailbox cracked first, a sharp metallic crunch, then the sound of something shattering against the garage door. Spray paint hissed. Robert screamed from the kitchen. I didn't run outside. I didn't confront her. I did something far quieter. I pressed record. My phone captured everything through the front window. The red paint dripping down the garage. Liar. The irony was almost elegant. She hurled something at the porch light. Glass exploded outward. Neighbors' lights flicked on now, for real. Voices murmured. Then tires screeched as she sped away. Robert was shaking. She's not thinking, he whispered. She is, I said calmly. Just not strategically. I dialed 911. My voice remained steady as I described vandalism, financial exploitation, and escalating threats. 2 patrol cars arrived within 12 minutes. I showed them the video. I handed them the printed documentation. I explained the Hellick. One officer, a man about Vanessa's age, looked at me carefully. Has she ever been violent? Before? No. Threatened you? Yes. He nodded. We'll file this immediately. Robert cried softly at the kitchen table while I signed the statement. By 10:05 p.m., a BOLO alert had been issued. Be on the lookout. It sounded dramatic. But this wasn't drama. It was procedure. When the police left, the house felt hollow, quieter than ever. The broken porch light left a dark shadow across the entryway. Robert sat across from me. I never imagined, he began. No one does, I said gently. He covered his face with his hands. She said you were slipping, that you were forgetting things, that you'd be safer somewhere monitored. I studied him carefully. Did you believe her? His silence hurt more than a confession. I wasn't sure, he whispered. Uncertainty is fertile soil for manipulation. I understood that now. At 11:27 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. This is Officer Delgado. We've located Miss Caldwell. I exhaled slowly. She was apprehended approximately 4 blocks from your residence after a traffic stop. There were items in the vehicle consistent with vandalism. Spray cans, tools, intent. She's being charged with criminal mischief and financial exploitation pending further investigation. Robert's eyes widened. She's arrested, he whispered. I nodded slowly. Officer Delgado continued. There will be a restraining order hearing within 48 hours. We recommend you attend. I will, I said. When I hung up, the house felt different again. Not peaceful, not fully restored, but aligned. Robert looked at me through tears. I didn't think she was capable of this. I don't think she thought I was capable of stopping her, I replied quietly. The television still played softly in the background. War documentaries. Calm narration about survival. I sat back in my armchair. The same chair, the same house, but something fundamental had shifted. Yesterday, she ripped the cord from the wall to test me. Tonight, she learned something. The door she tried to. Control was never hers. I didn't expect sleep that night, but exhaustion has its own mercy. Sometime after midnight, sitting upright in my armchair with the television muted and the house dim, I drifted into a shallow, restless kind of sleep. The kind where your mind keeps watch even when your eyes close. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. I was awake before the second vibration. Robert stirred on the couch across from me. He hadn't gone upstairs. I don't think he wanted to be alone. The number was unfamiliar again. I answered. This is Officer Delgado. I wanted to update you before morning. My body remained still, my voice steady. Go ahead. Ms. Caldwell was processed and is currently being held. However, there's something you should know. A pause. She was agitated. Repeatedly stated you fabricated the financial allegations. Claimed you were mentally unstable and dangerous. Of course she did. She also attempted to contact your husband multiple times from holding. I glanced at Robert. His eyes were open now, watching me. Thank you for letting me know, I said quietly. There will be a temporary restraining order placed automatically due to the vandalism and documented financial exploitation concerns. She will not be permitted within 500 feet of the residence pending the hearing. I understand. When I ended the call, Robert spoke in a fragile whisper. She thinks you're unstable. She needs that narrative, I replied calmly. Without it, she has nothing. He swallowed hard. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the house already felt different. Not tense. Clarified. By 9 a.m., Patricia called. The bank's legal division has completed a preliminary review, she said. They're classifying the helic as fraudulent activity. That was quick. They have incentive. It protects them as well. She paused. There's more. I leaned back in my chair. They trace the transferred funds into speculative trading accounts. Significant losses. Margin exposure. It appears Ms. Caldwell was attempting to recover losses by increasing leverage. A gambling spiral. That explained the urgency, the escalation, the risk. Does it reach criminal threshold? I asked. Yes. I closed my eyes briefly. Not out of grief, out of acceptance. There's a moment when you realize someone you hoped was misguided is instead reckless. And reckless people don't stop at suggestion, they stop at impact. Around noon, Robert's phone buzzed. He stared at it for a long time before answering. I could hear Vanessa's voice faintly through the speaker. Rapid, defensive, emotional. Dad, she's twisting everything. Robert's eyes darted toward me. She's exaggerating. His hand shook. You said she was declining, he whispered into the phone. A pause. I said we needed to protect assets. Protect assets? I watched the recognition settle into his posture. She trusted you, he said softly. Her voice sharpened, defensive. She's old. She doesn't understand risk. I didn't interrupt. Didn't react. After a moment, Robert ended the call without saying goodbye. He sat motionless. Then he began to cry. Not loud, not hysterical, just quiet realization. I thought I was protecting her, he said through tears. I thought you were just stubborn about money. I am stubborn, I admitted gently. But not incompetent. He covered his face. I let her convince me you were slipping. That's how it starts, I said softly. Manipulation rarely begins with lies. It begins with doubt. By late afternoon, The formal restraining order was delivered. An officer knocked at the door and handed me the paperwork in a sealed envelope. 500 feet, no contact, no financial access. The legal system had drawn a boundary Vanessa could not cross. For the first time in months, I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not relief. Stability. That evening, something unexpected happened. Robert approached me while I was in the office reviewing additional bank documentation. "Eleanor," he said quietly. I looked up. He stood straighter now, more certain. "I'm filing for separation." I studied him carefully. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I married you because I trusted your steadiness." I let her convince me that steadiness was weakness. His eyes were clear now. "She's been volatile for years." I just kept reframing it as drive. Drive without restraint becomes entitlement. Entitlement without consequence becomes exploitation. "I won't live like that," he said. I believed him. The following morning, we attended the temporary hearing. Vanessa stood on the opposite side of the courtroom wearing a pressed blazer and a carefully neutral expression. She looked composed, polished, but her eyes moved too quickly. The judge reviewed the documentation carefully. Financial records, video evidence of vandalism, email correspondence referencing assisted living. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge asked me directly, "have you undergone any recent cognitive evaluation?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied calmly. Patricia had arranged one the previous day. Voluntary, comprehensive. I handed the report forward. The judge skimmed it. Cognitive function above average for age. A subtle shift rippled across the room. Narrative dismantled. Vanessa's composure fractured just slightly. The restraining order was extended, pending full financial investigation. Court adjourned. As we stepped outside, Vanessa's mask slipped. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath. I looked at her without anger. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not." But not in the way she meant. That afternoon, something else collapsed. Not legally, emotionally. Robert received another call. Vanessa had been released on bond. Within hours, she showed up at his workplace parking lot, shouting, blaming, accusing him of betrayal. Security escorted her away. When he called me, his voice shook differently this time. Not from confusion. From clarity. "She's not protecting me," he whispered. "No," I said. Gently. "She's protecting herself." That night, as I sat in my armchair again, the television quietly narrating battles long past, I understood something important. The collapse wasn't her arrest. It wasn't the restraining order. It wasn't the financial exposure. The collapse was the illusion. The illusion that manipulation equals strength. The illusion that silence equals consent. The illusion that age equals vulnerability. She had built her position slowly, but it unraveled quickly once examined. And I realized something else. The most dangerous moment in any conflict isn't when someone attacks you. It's when they believe you won't respond. And Vanessa had miscalculated one thing. She thought I was tired. She thought I was fading. She thought I was afraid of confrontation. She never considered that I was patient. And patience, when focused, becomes precision. For months later, the house felt like itself again. Not because the walls had changed, not because the locks were new, but because the tension that had once moved quietly through the rooms, like a draft you can't quite locate, was gone. The garage had been repainted, the mailbox replaced, the porch light repaired. If you drove past from the street, you would never know what had happened here. But I would, and that mattered. The financial investigation concluded in early February. The bank classified the Helic as fraud. Charges were filed formally. Vanessa accepted a plea deal. Restitution, probation, mandatory financial counseling. She never went to trial. She didn't want the emails read aloud in a courtroom. She didn't want the phrase, cognitive decline narrative, entered into the public record. She didn't want the numbers displayed on a screen. For someone who liked control, transparency was unbearable. Robert finalized the separation shortly after. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't theatrical. It was tired. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had first laid out the folders labeled asset transition and signed papers quietly. I don't know how I missed it, he said once, staring at the wood grain. You wanted to believe her, I answered gently. I wanted to believe you were safe. I was, I said. I just wasn't alert. That was my part in it. Trust is not weakness, but trust without verification is risk. After he moved into a smaller place across town, the house felt larger, echoing at first, but gradually steady. On Wednesday mornings, I began hosting something new. It started small. 3 people around my dining table. A retired teacher whose grandson had convinced her to co-sign loans she didn't understand. A widower whose son had borrowed from his retirement savings. A former nurse who had nearly signed over power of attorney after a questionable diagnosis. Word spread. We didn't call it therapy. We called it the Wednesday Review. Coffee, printed statements, calm conversation. No shame, just clarity. The first time I told my story out loud, my voice didn't tremble. It didn't carry anger. It carried recognition. It started with a television cord, I told them. But it was never about the television. They nodded, because they understood. Small acts are rarely small. They are signals. At home, I kept the cord Vanessa had ripped from the wall. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a symbol of interruption. The moment silence broke. Some evenings I sit in my armchair, the same cream-upholstered chair worn soft from decades of living, and I let the television play quietly. History documentaries, old westerns, even the news. Sometimes no one walks in to unplug it. No one comments on productive content. The house breathes differently now. Not because conflict never existed, but because boundaries do. A few weeks ago, Robert stopped by. He stood on the porch, well beyond his daughter's legal boundary, and handed me a book I'd lent him years ago. I'm sorry, he said. Not for loving his daughter, but for doubting me. I know, I replied. We don't speak often. But when we do, it's honest. That's enough. As for Vanessa, I don't know where her ventures stand. I don't follow the markets she once chased so recklessly. I don't check her name in public records. Accountability will do what it does. I don't need to supervise it. Sometimes people ask if I feel vindicated. I don't. Vindication implies victory. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction, a recalibration. There's something you learn when you practice estate law for nearly 4 decades. Discrepancies rarely begin with massive theft. They begin with small assumptions, with overlooked details, with redefined language. Left alone, they compound. Addressed early, they resolve. My life was no different. I ignored the rounding errors, the subtle comments, the shifting paperwork, the repositioned language. In this house. That phrase still echoes sometimes. But now when I hear it in memory, it lands differently. Yes. In this house. In this life. In this mind. I remain the owner. If you're listening to this and something small in your world feels slightly off, if someone is redefining your reality one conversation at a time, pause. Not to react, but to review. Not to accuse, but to audit. Silence can be generous, but silence can also be permission. I chose to interrupt mine. And it changed everything. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt your steadiness mistaken for weakness, or your patience mistaken for surrender, I'd like to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? What small signal have you ignored that might deserve a second look? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your story may help someone else recognize their own turning point. We have many more stories like this. Stories about dignity, boundaries, and the quiet strength that doesn't shout but still stands firm. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep reviewing what matters together.